Hi, I'm Ivo Herzog, lead animation engineer at CIG, and today I want to talk about the experiments we did to get the camera stable in the first-person view. The first-person mode we have in Star Citizen is a bit unusual, because it's unified with the third-person body, and it's also driven by the animations of the third-person body. And it took quite a while to get this kind of setup to work. If you just take a camera and put it at a point between the eyes of the third-person model and move around, then it's pretty crazy what you get on the screen. So that's how it looks with a camera attached to the head. As soon as you start to move, you get this crazy camera shake, and it almost looks like the camera is randomly bouncing around. So this is nothing we can use in the game, and it's certainly not how humans perceive motions in real life. But the funny thing is, this is actually the real motion of the head. This is all part of the mocap data. If you take a GoPro camera, attach it to your forehead and move around, then it looks exactly like this. So this means head motions can be pretty extreme, and it also means that our eyes and our brain are doing a pretty good job to compensate it. That's why we're not even aware that this issue exists in real life. And the first thing we did to improve this was eye stabilization. And that's something we humans do all the time. It's basically a counter-rotation of the eyeballs to compensate for the movements of the head. And this is pretty easy to implement. All you need is a camera with a focus point, and that's just a point in the distance you can control with the mouse when you're aiming. So that's how it looks with eye stabilization. When I move around, everything feels much smoother than before, and the image is now perfectly aligned with the horizon. And by using this focus point, we are actually trying to emulate the biological principle that keeps the image stable on the retina of our eyes. But instead of counter-rotating both eyes, we only counter-rotate the head camera in the direction of the focus point. And with this simple trick, we can eliminate about 80% of all the camera noise. But if you look now on the screen, that you can see the image is still not perfectly smooth. And that's because eye stabilization only works well if you move forward in an open environment and focus at a point in the distance. It doesn't really work when you move close to walls, and that's something you can't avoid in narrow corridors, and we have lots of them on a space station. It also doesn't work when you strafe in front of walls, and strafing is something we do all the time in a first-person game. And it looks pretty terrible with all the stop and start motions that we have. So when you start to run and stop directly in front of an object, then you get this bounce back effect. So all this is nothing new. We already had it in PTU 2.0, and nobody was really happy with the result, mainly because of all the camera noise and the head bobbing. And then some people started to complain about motion sickness, and for many it was just an immersion killer and not realistic at all. And this all makes sense because eye stabilization, if you look at it as an isolated feature, it can only compensate the rotations of the head, and that's it. It doesn't help much with the translations of the head. But that's why we still have all the trouble with the camera. Now, the interesting thing is, these head translations, they happen all the time in real life, and it's never a problem. When I walk into the kitchen to get a coffee, then my whole body and my head is moving, of course. But the whole motion feels more like floating through the corridor. And maybe that's what we expect to get on the screen. But if I repeat the same experiment with a camera attached to the head, and even if I use exactly the same mocap data, the result on the screen looks more like an earthquake. So this issue was keeping us busy for a while, and we spent some time trying to understand how humans are doing vision stabilization. But it turned out it's a pretty complex mental process, and there wasn't a practical way to get that into a first-person camera. So that was a dead end. And all the techniques to stabilize handheld cameras, they don't work in our case, because our camera is attached to the head and driven by a human body. So we had to find something else. And we found something. It was just a bit unexpected. We learned that birds, or at least most types of birds, they have a pretty interesting problem. They can't roll the eyes around the way humans can. And that makes it a bit hard for them to keep the vision stable and move the body at the same time. If you can't keep your vision stable by moving your eyes, well, then the next logical step is to try to do the opposite and just keep the head stable. And that's what they do. Birds have a long neck, so they just counter-translate all the body motions. It's kind of a camera stabilizer invented by nature. But the really cool thing is, that this one operates only on joints, and that means we have a pretty good candidate for an implementation into an animation system. Now, to get all this to work with a human rig in the game, we designed a full-body IK system to control the hands, the legs, and the head independently. And we also use a special IK only for the hands in first person. And what we see here is a combination of eye stabilization with head stabilization. And stabilization itself happens mainly on the head camera, and only for a few extreme motions we distribute the rest over the entire body. And the adjustments on the body are only a couple of centimeters. But as you can see, this is already enough to keep the image perfectly stable on the screen. The unified rig is not the only unusual thing in this shooter. Another pretty big difference is how we spawn the bullets. In a typical shooter, they come from the center of the camera and go to the center of the screen, which means you're actually shooting with your eyes, and the gun in your hands has no practical purpose. But in Star Citizen, we spawn the bullets directly from the gun barrel, and that changes a few rules. For example, iron sights and scopes don't point directly at the target, so you always need to aim a little bit higher, maybe 2 or 3 centimeters. And because now all body motions have a direct impact on the gun barrel, running and shooting doesn't work so well. There's way too much bullet spread going on. And the same goes for recoil. When you're firing too fast while the gun is recoiling, then it's very hard to hit something. And as a player, when you're moving around in a shooter, you always have this gun in front of you. And most of the time, you're not even aware that there actually is a body. And you only notice your own body when you look down at the ground and see your own shadow and how the feet are moving. And that's the moment you realize that the recoil, all the hand animations, all the body animations, every single frame is actually identical in the shadow, because it's one single rig and all the animations are shared.
Industries, the universe's leading producer of commercial-class starliners, is proud to welcome you aboard Port Olisar.